we'll start at the beginning. If you can tell us about your childhood growing up, a little bit about your parents and where you grew up.
Well, I was born in Elgin, Illinois in 1922, November 29th, 1922. And my grandfather came to the town of Elgin from Norway in 1877. And my grandmother is one of the founders of the Norwegian Lutheran Church in Elgin. And I've lived there all my life. And I have one son and a wife and two grandchildren. And I worked at various industries in Elgin. One of them was a Brethren Publishing Company, which published religious documents and papers. And before I joined the Army, I worked in an auto body shop for a man that was by the name of Mr. Corwin, which is, but I ended up after the war buying the shop from his wife, and so I ran an auto upholstery business for 40 years in Elgin, Illinois. And I joined the Army in October 19th, 1941. And I enlisted with a friend of mine. We went to grade school together. And we went down to the recruiting office and told him we wanted to join the Army, but we wanted to be together. So he told us that, well, he could handle that all right. So he signed us up to an armor division, which we wanted to drive a truck anyway. So, and we ended up in Camp Grand, Illinois, where we took our physicals and everything. And from there we went to Fort Campbell, Kentucky, Camp Campbell, Kentucky. And I think it was October the 20th, 1942, when I was in Campbell. And I went to the 494th Field Artillery Battalion, Service Battery, and my buddy went to which was the 56th Infantry Battalion. And I went through basic training, and we went on maneuvers. I drove an ammunition truck, 6x6. Well, one day going back to the barracks, I decided to stop at the PX and get some cigarettes. And I pulled up to the PX, and I left the keys in the ignition and the engine running. I went into the PX, and when I come out, the MP was standing there. So he says, well, we got to do something about this. He says, that's strictly against the law because you got a load of ammunition in the back of the truck to start with. So I had to go up in front of the battalion commander, and he says, well, I don't think we need you in the artillery anymore. We're going to send you to the infantry. So they busted me from PFC to private and just gave me 30 days at KP, and they sent me to the 17th, where I was in the machine gun squad. So I took basic training with the 17th, and we went overseas on the Empress of Australia, and we landed in Liverpool. But before we got there on the Empress of Australia, I wasn't going to stay down there in the bottom of the ship with all these guys, you know, and I mean, it was a stinking mess, really. So my buddy and I, we found a life raft up on the third deck of the ship, so we slept in there. Nobody even knew we were there. And one night we was walking down around the decks up there, and I found a key in the shower, the officer's shower. So I swiped the key out of the shower, and me and him were the two cleanest guys on the Empress of Australia, because we were taking showers with fresh water, and the rest of them was using the saltwater soap. And we shipped out of Southampton, and we landed in Le Havre. And from there we went to Off-A, France, where we stayed the first night. And from there we went by truck up to the front lines, and we landed right at the Maginot Line in I think it was Beining Barracks, is where Rohrbach, or one of the towns there. And I can remember we walked through a minefield one night. The lieutenants took us right through the minefield on a patrol, and we ended back up in the same town we started from. And we walked through the minefield, and nobody stepped on a mine. So the farther we got into Germany, and we went to Herlisheim, and I'm one of the one of the survivors of Herlisheim, I think there was only 3 of us left in the machine gun squad. The rest of them were captured or wounded, and I think it was 2 of them was killed. And I got out of Herlisheim because I was down in the basement of a house, and I had the ammunition cans with me, but the machine gun was across the street. And I couldn't get across the street. There was shell fire and bullets zipping all over the place. So there was a lieutenant in the basement with me. I don't know what his name was, but he says, crawl out the window, and he says there's a tank sitting out in the back of the house. And the gun was facing up the main street in Herlisheim, where he had backed up. So he says, take the telephone off the back of the half track or the tank. And he said, I want to talk to the tank commander. Well, I crawl out the window, and I reached for the telephone, and that's the last thing I remember. Evidently, the tank got hit by an 88 or something. And I ended up in a medical, on the back end of a light tank. And I went back with some of the wounded guys. We went back to, I think the town was Rohrbach, I'm not sure. And, but I ended up in the 36th Infantry Medical Center. And I didn't know who I was or anything, because evidently when the shell hit the tank, the concussion, I didn't know anything for 3 days. So finally they got me back to the 12th. And by that time we'd pulled back out of Herlisheim. And so then they needed a half-track driver for headquarters company. And I still had a license to drive a half-track, so I think the half-track driver had to go to the hospital for appendicitis. So anyway, I ended up in headquarters company, the 17th, and I drove the S2, which is the intelligence officer. We had all kinds of maps, radios, and everything in the half-track. And we were going down one of the roads after Herlisheim, just after we got across the Rhine River. And I looked out the vision slot on the side of the half-track. They had armor plate was down, on the windshield and everything. And I see this Messerschmitt coming over the hedgerows like this. He was coming. It's just like Patton's movie. You could see the 20 millimeters coming up the road. And he put 4 rounds into the half-track, and he killed the interpreter. I still don't know the kid's name. And it blew one of the tracks off, and one of the shells went into the engine and blew the half-track up. And one landed in a roll of maps right behind my head, and I never got a scratch out of it. But it blew the maps all to pieces, And from there we went on into Germany. We got another half-track, and from there we went on into Germany to the end of the war. And at the end of the war, they asked me if I didn't have enough points to go home, because my buddy had gone home already because he had a child while he was at Camp Barkley. And so I went to the 1st Armored Division, the 1st Tank Battalion of the 1st Armored Division. They were stationed in Karlsruhe, Germany at the time. And I went into the Constabulary Forces. And I drove the battalion commander. And him and I drove all over Germany. He was a promoter, this guy. This was after the war. We went to Berlin, we went every place. And I came home, we shipped home from Ludwigshafen, Germany, and I come home across through the English Channel on a ship that rocked so bad we took the 3 lifeboats off the side of it, and we landed in Fort Dix, New Jersey. And that was September 1946, and I came home from there. And from there I ended up in the auto upholstery business in my hometown, and I still live there.
What do you remember about the Tennessee maneuvers?
Pardon?
What do you remember about the Tennessee maneuvers?
The maneuvers and everything?
The Tennessee maneuvers?
Well, we went through Lebanon, Tennessee. I remember Lebanon, Kentucky, Tennessee, I believe it was. And they had the blue forces and the red forces, and I think I was in the blue ones. But at that time, I drove the ammunition truck, but it was also converted into a kitchen truck, and so which was nice because I got to sleep on the stoves in the back end. It was nice and warm at night. And a good friend of mine was killed on maneuvers. He was cleaning a gun for an officer, and it had a live round of ammunition in it, and his name was Butts. He was from the 494th Field Artillery Battalion, the service battery. And I don't know what happened to the officer, but he wasn't around very long after that. He was cleaning the gun, and the gun went off and killed him. And they wanted me to go with his body down to, he was from Arkansas. And I told him, no, I didn't want no part of that, so, because I'd met his family, you know. So, but he was buried with military honors in Arkansas. And we went all down through Tennessee and Kentucky, and they came back. And then we went to Camp Barkley, of course. And I can still remember the plywood barracks, where the armadillos would walk underneath the plywood barracks, and they were so low to the ground you could hear his back scratching on it all the way, all night long. He'd be walking back and forth. And I've been back to Barkley once, but not to see the new monument, the old one that was there. But my friend, he rented a house in Camp Barkley, and he was married in Abilene, I believe. And so that's about it, I guess.
Did you have any interaction with, like, do you remember anything about Abilene? Did you ever go into the city?
I can't remember much about it, except going to his house, you know, and having dinner with him or something, but I didn't get to town that much. So I can remember the 25-mile hikes through the desert, what we called the desert, you know. So.
What about the train rides to and from?
Well, the one I remember is from Barkley to, we went to Indiana, and I remember the Red Cross was there with coffee and donuts, and we landed at Camp Shanks, New York. And from there, at Camp Shanks, New York, I got a one-day pass to go to New York. And there'd been some bad storms or something, because I can remember that a lot of the buildings were damaged right in downtown New York. I think it was a hurricane that, part of a hurricane that came in there. And I was also in London on a pass when they dropped a V-2 rocket about 10 blocks up the street. And we were staying in the Red Cross Hotel in London, England at that time, just for an overnight pass, you know. And,
anything else about Camp Shanks?
no, I don't remember anything about that. No.
At Colmar, were you?
Well, Colmar was just another battle, because but everything concentrates on Herlisheim, and I don't see why it is, because we had other good battles too, you know. I mean, we had the ball bearing works at Schweinfurt. We were on the outskirts of Schweinfurt, and nobody ever says anything about it, you know.
What happened there? What did you guys encounter?
Well, I mean, it was just a battle. It was action, you know, and we helped take the town to Schweinfurt, and they don't seem to have much history written about it, and I don't know why. It was just another town, I guess. But if you look at the route of the 17th Infantry, we have a newspaper. It's in the history books of the route that the 17th took, and there was a lot of towns that aren't even mentioned, you know. A lot of guys died for them towns. They're just little burgs, you know, don't amount to much, but so I wish they had more of a history of it, of the places we went to, you know. Like all the time we were attached to Patton in the 3rd Army. When the Battle of the Bulge was going on, you know, we went north over them icy roads, and you couldn't keep it. A tank couldn't even stay on the road. There was so much ice. They were sliding off the road into the ditches, and we had one tank. Went down the hill in this one town, and he couldn't stop because he had steel tracks on it. There was ice on the pavement. He stuck the barrel of the gun right through the house. He went right straight through the house. It was a 35-ton tank, you know, and there were Germans running all over the place. I mean, the civilians, you know. And I think he's trying a little retribution, you know, for this tank going through his house. You can't blame him. And so there's a lot of things like that happened, but you don't have any history of that, you know. So.
Do you have any more stories about when you were under Patton at the end?
No, I can remember. I went to what's the name of the town? when I was in the 1st Armored Division, we were the honor guard at the railroad station at the college town in Germany. Was it not Heidenheim? They never did bomb that city because it was such an important city. I mean, as far as historical things go. But anyway, I was one of the honor guards in the 1st Armored Division at the railroad station when the Patton's body came in off of it. They had him on a half-track, and all the armor plate was taken off. And they had a parade and everything, and they loaded his casket onto the train that took him to Belgium, where he was buried with the 3rd Army troops, you know. And I can't think of the name of the big city. It's a college city. I keep thinking of Heidenheim, but that's not the name of it, no. No. That was kind of interesting, so.
What was your experience with like the men or you, how you felt about Patton?
When I did what?
About Patton. How did you feel about him?
Blood and guts. Our blood and his guts. You know, I don't know. I kind of admired him. I don't know. He was a little different than a lot of generals we had. I mean, he was different than Bradley because, like Bradley, I mean, he cared more about the GIs than anybody did of any of the officers, you know, or the generals. But Patton, you know, was one of the richest men in the Army, and he was a well-educated guy. I've read a lot of stories about him. I've got his tape, Patton story, and all that stuff. But he lived in the past, you know. He figured he lived and died in the past. He's reincarnation. And that's what he always said. And he believed that he lived at the time of the Romans. And so, but I don't know, it was kind of a strange funeral because as the procession was going down the street in this city, some lady come running out of the crowd all dressed in black, and she laid a rose on the top of his casket. And then she went back into the crowds before the MPs could catch her. So they never did know who she was. It was, you know, kind of a strange thing. And I wish I could rent any of that city, but that's about all I can remember. So.
Did you have any personal contact with General Bradley?
Pardon?
Did you have any encounters with General Bradley?
No. I just know that he was a GI general, you know. He was for the GIs, yeah. And,
do you remember any other?
Well, I remember when Colonel Meigs got killed. Yeah, I remember that. We were it was in the foxhole, maybe a quarter of a mile from there, and we heard that he'd been killed in the tank, you know. And but as far as the officers goes, that's about. We had Lieutenant Egren in the 17th that was killed. It was a very nice man. And but after I got transferred out of B Company, when I started to drive the radio half-track for headquarters company, well, then I didn't see much combat after that. I mean, as far as, you know, personal combat, but except for the plane strafings, which was an experience. And but we had a 260 Messerschmitt 262 bombers too, you know, German jet. And he didn't bomb us personally, but I mean, he dropped a couple of 500-pound bombs, but 2 miles up the road, you could see where they exploded.
When was that?
And we heard them going over us. It was after we got over the Rhine River. That was. So that's about all I can remember. It's different things, you know.
That's great. We really appreciate your time.
Okay, thank you.
Oh, I have a question. Were you married to your wife before or after the military?
Oh, after the war. No, yeah.
And I don't remember if you said, well, what did your parents do when you were growing up? You said that
My
you-
father worked in the Elgin watch factory, which was in the town of Elgin at that time, and he worked in the watch factory, and he also worked in a couple of restaurants. He was a very good cook. And he died, my father died at the age of 65, 2 days after I was discharged out of the Army, and he had a stroke. And my mother lived to be 85, and she died in 1976, I believe.
Did you get to
And,
see him?
like I say, I got 2 grandchildren, and my grandson goes to Valparaiso, Indiana University. He wants to be an astrophysicist. And he got a grant from NASA, paid for a scholarship, and my granddaughter's 16, and she wants to be a radio announcer. And so my son works for, he worked for Illinois Bell Telephone Company for 25 years, and now it's Ameritech. He works at Fermilab, where they split the atoms. And my grandson worked there this summer, the last 2 summers he's worked there on spring break. And he sets up all the computers for the experiments at Fermilab. And he's a pretty smart kid.
I guess.
Yeah, he's 22. Yeah.
That's all.
So I hope he doesn't end up flipping hamburgers at McDonald's, because it's cost a lot of money to send him to school, you know.
Yeah.
So,
Did you get to see your father before he died?
yeah, yes I did, yes, yeah, yeah,
Just barely.
yeah. Yeah, that's it, I guess.
All right.
Okay?
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you.